All right, everybody. I'm here today with Brady Santens. He's a Montana folk. He's not from North Dakota, so we're gonna kind of combine North Dakota and Montana, different lures, baits, tackle, and everything. So, what do you want to start out with first?
Let's start out with pike, huh?
Pike. All right.
Why don't you pick up that one too?
Nice up to the camera.
So this would be your common blade bait, spinner bait, called different names. Uh, this one on here has got a plastic trailer on it. That's just on there for added action. Primarily, you're going to be fishing these for largemouth bass and northern pike. One thing I can say about this bait is this bait's more of a reaction bait. It's got these large blades on here, hence the name blade bait. And they're used for putting off vibrations in the water, since fish are so sensitive to vibrations in the water, especially with the species like the northern pike. They're ambush predators. They're going to be using their sensory organs, be looking for prey. Also, too, is if it's a sunny day out, these blades are very shiny, and they're going to definitely be putting out light into the water, making them easier for the northern pike to see, because northern pike have really big eyes because they're sight hunters. So that definitely helps out the usability of this bait. Personally, I've had success on this bait, but ultimately there are other bait options that we'll be talking about later that are better for using for northern pike specifically. But that's about all I got for this one.
All right. I suppose we can go straight into spoons. I'll pick up this big spoon right here. All right, so spoons. Generally my favorite for like larger predatory fish. I'd say they work pretty good for walleye, pike. That's pretty much it in North Dakota, I'd say. What else would you say?
I've caught a lot of trout on big spoons.
Not as big as this though, for like North Dakota wise.
Lake trout.
Yeah, lake trout in like Montana. That's
lake trout, brown trout, a lot of different species.
Yeah.
And trout species.
Yeah, we go smaller into the size of spoon. As you can see, there's like a reflective side to that. So like what Brady was talking about before, you have like the light reflection in the water when it's like a bright day out or something like that, and it makes like a lot of movement in the water. It sways like side to side in a way, so it attracts a lot of attention through like vibrations and stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of these lure companies too, they think if their lure is going to displace more water, it's going to attract more fish. And sometimes that does end up working, but it has to be with a very specific species. They have to be very aggressive. So that's what all of these lures are really targeting.
Yeah, I agree. And I think spoon is like the most common way people use to like fish. Is like it's the easiest lure to use. You don't have to do like a lot of things. All you have to do is cast and reel. Some of these other baits you have to like kind of do like certain movements with your rods.
Yeah,
and
there's
stuff,
there's very certain techniques definitely once you get into like your soft plastics. And also too, just with these baits, you just cast them out, you reel them in. You don't gotta do anything fancy. They're very universal. You can catch a lot of fish on them. I mean, they're made in sizes like this one, which is probably 3.5 inches, down to like this smaller one, which is primarily used for jigging and ice fishing, which is a technique of fishing. Um, or even these ones, they're not technically spoons just because of their design, but I mean, they basically function the same exact way. And I've caught a lot of trout up in alpine lakes on these types of lures, and they're just very easy to use.
What do you think would like target that in like a North Dakota lake?
Honestly, I think primarily anything that's going to be eating other fish. I mean, believe it or not, brook trout, which is it's one of the most aggressive species of trout, it's probably second to the lake trout if I had to name another species that's more aggressive. But I've literally had brook trout hit spoons that are even bigger than this one, which is pretty crazy to think about. It's just, it really doesn't matter. Like, you can catch a small fish on a giant lure, and I think a lot of people think if they're fishing with a bigger lure, they're going to catch a bigger fish because that's what everybody says, but that's really not what happens once you fish a lot. Like, I've caught pike, giant pike on something like that when I'm fishing for perch. Like, it doesn't really matter what you're using. It's just kind of like how it works in the water and what the fish are preferencing in that area.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say like anything from like bluegill to like crappie or even like smaller walleye would go for like smaller spoons like this. I don't know. It's just more of an attraction for some of those fish, and yeah, they like to eat other fish also. So like what Brady said.
It depends on a lot of climatic factors too, for sure. Depending on like which color you're gonna use. If the water is super murky, you're gonna opt for something like this top water, which is white, so that the fish can see it, because they'll hear the vibration from this tail spinning in the top, but if they see it, that'll really make them want to hit it.
So yeah, with the top water, this little tail like spins up and down and makes like a what noise would you like think it makes?
It's a plop noise.
Yeah,
That's why it's called
plop,
a
plop,
whopper
plop.
plopper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
plopper plopper. Yep.
And then this other type of top water here, this is called a popper, and basically you just cast it out and you're reeling in, and then you flick your rod tip so that it pulls it, like lunges through the water, and this convex right here, water goes in and then splashes it back out, and it makes like a popping noise on top of the water. And this lure specifically, I've caught a lot of largemouth bass on. I've caught a few smallmouth bass on it. I'm glad a pike's never bitten it, because without a steel leader, this thing would probably be gone. That's another point to talk on. Pike are, when it comes to their teeth, they're no joke. And these steel leaders, I mean, I've even had pike bite through these steel leaders before, just because they're so big and they had so many teeth. I mean, they probably have I'm not sure exactly, but they have thousands of teeth. They even got teeth on the inside of their gills. I've cut myself before.
Razor sharp.
Yeah, trying to hold a pike, I've cut myself before. Dawson was actually with me when I did cut myself on them, and even their gill plates are very pointy and sharp, and they're just a brutal fish to handle. So you really got to know what you're doing, and that's why you got to use these when you're fishing for them, because if you don't, and they hit your line at all with their teeth, it's just gonna break you clean right off.
Yeah, 100%. You want to go into like plastics and frogs and stuff?
Yeah. Well, I guess frog still ties into top water.
Yeah.
I mean, I've only used these fishing for largemouth bass here in North Dakota specifically, just because we don't have a lot of frog species in Montana. I don't know, around here, do you know? There's quite a few toad or frog species.
I definitely have seen a bunch of like frogs at like more pond areas, like
Yeah.
even at like dikes.
At the
I wouldn't say
dike.
like lake wise. Some they might be like deeper into North Dakota, but
Yeah.
like, I don't know. For
'Cause,
our
like,
area, there's not really like a lot of frog species at like lake wise.
I feel like when me and you went there though with these at the dike, we were having pretty consistent success with them though.
Especially with bass. Bass love these things. Just come jumping straight out of the water from 'em.
It's definitely like, it's one of the easier top waters you use, because there's no wrong way to fish it. Specifically, like, you don't need to pause. Like, it definitely does help if you do that. But like, if you gave this lure to a kid, like, they could cast it out there, just reel it in,
100%.
and then you don't have to worry about getting snagged and stuff too.
So with frogs, sometimes I like to like change my rhythm when reeling it in. I like to like jig it a little bit, like you would like a jig. I don't know. It's just like there's different ways you can go about reeling in like frogs, but with jigs, they're a little bit different. I don't know if you want to talk about jig heads, stuff like that.
Yeah, we can
Soft
talk about some
plastics.
jig heads. So jig heads and soft plastics really go hand in hand when it comes down to picking which jig head you're going to use. You really want to know what technique you're going to be fishing. So like for bass fishing per se, this is a Ned rig. So this is a 3-inch worm with a flat-headed jig. So this is called a Ned jig head. So this is for a specific type of fishing. Primarily I use it in Montana for smallmouth bass in clear lakes. And basically what happens with that flat jig head, it can sit flat against the rocks on the bottom of the lake. So then what you're doing is, so it sits straight up and down, so your hook's pointing down, and all the smallmouth bass are sitting in the rocks when they're spawning, and you just bounce it up and down across the rocks, and the noise of that lead head hitting the rocks is normally what attracts them. There's also some types of soft plastics that have rattles inside of them for an attractant, and basically what you're mimicking there is a crayfish going into their nests to eat their eggs. And it's a very effective form of fishing, but you can only do it for a short period of time, because it's during the spawning time that it primarily works. Because then you definitely have to switch tactics after they spawn, because then they move into deeper water, and then that's also when temperature starts to come into play.
Yeah, I agree with that. But like in North Dakota, I feel like it wouldn't. We don't really have that many smallmouth bass, but I know it does like really affect like white bass. We have Lake Sakakawea here, and like what he said about like hitting the rocks. It definitely does draw attention for like bass species like that. I've definitely used this for largemouth bass too, and I found it to be quite effective depending on what you use for soft plastic or whatever. But yeah, I feel like they're effective in both North Dakota and Montana. Would you say?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Then we also just have like a regular jig head. So this I like to use for North Dakota species like
Here with that.
crappie. I don't know any fish like that. Like even bluegill. Bluegill love jigs. Just like so like when you want to use like a jig, you want it to be like an up and like down motion, and like when you want to have what you want it to the side, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want your rod to the side, so you like do like a little bouncing up and down, just like going like that.
Yeah, it's because when you're fishing, you always want, especially with like these plastics and you're jigging them on the bottom, you want to have the most natural presentation possible for what prey items are in that lake, and that's based off of what plastic you're using. At least that's what you do if you're smart.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, just like these tiny soft plastics. That's all you need to do.
I've caught pike off of those.
Yeah, insane.
Primarily perch for me on those.
Yeah. The perfect way for me to like, I don't know, put it on a jig head is like go straight with the head of the soft plastic and put it right at the pointy end of the hook. You just push it all the way through on the hook. Kind of mess that up. But yeah, just like follow it all the way through. And it creates a good tail, and you have like just enough hook set like out on the edge. Just like that. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, just like that. Yeah.
Yeah, basically all I do is I put it straight through the top, down the middle, bring it down the bait, and then you want to make sure that your bait sits as flat as possible so that it looks as natural as possible.
Yeah.
So when it's sitting on the bottom, it's sticking straight up and down. It's not bending to the side.
Mhm. Do you want to talk a little bit about wacky rigs and stuff?
Yeah, so this is called a wacky rig. This is a fishing technique used for largemouth bass. I've also caught smallmouth bass while doing this. It's just bycatch of what you're really going for. This is under a category of finesse fishing. So since you have no weight, you just tie this directly to your line. You just have this one big hook with this 1/8-inch worm where you stab it through the middle and have it sit flat on the bottom of the hook. So when you cast it out, you have to wait a long time to let it sink to the bottom because it takes so long, because you want to get around that vegetation where these largemouth bass are sitting in, waiting and ambushing. So as it sinks down, it kind of sits flat in the water, almost like this, or maybe even up. But the second that you close your bill, once you feel like it's sinked deep enough, that thing's going to come very reactive in the water. So that's why with your rod, your twitches and your rhythm really make a difference in your success with this bait. So you can't go too fast, but you also can't go too slow. It has to look like something like a worm, an earthworm or something, got in the water and it's just floating down, and the rhythm of how these two ends bounce really makes a difference in how many fish you can catch. I've gone out with people and I'll catch 20 or 30 fish and they'll catch maybe 2 or 3, and we're fishing the same exact color and everything, same spots. It just depends on how you fish it, and it takes a lot of experience to do.
Yeah, I can agree with that. He even Brady actually taught me how to use the wacky rig, and I remember him always catching more fish than me, which kind of sucked. But he definitely taught me how to use it. But we've definitely doubled up on this. I have a picture of that.
It's very effective once you learn it.
That's on my website actually, so I have that linked to my blog. So I'll link that also. But yeah, wacky rigs are very effective for largemouth bass, I'd say. I suppose you could like maybe try and catch a pike on it.
I've caught pike on them.
But mainly affects largemouth bass. They're pretty aggressive. I don't know. Yeah. What do you think? Like smallmouth bass, also like white bass.
I've caught smallmouth on it. I'm sure white bass would.
Yeah, white bass probably.
They're all in the same family.
Yeah. So yeah, that's basically like all the lures, baits, everything that you need to know for like, I'd say North Dakota and Montana combined fishing, but mostly like for North Dakota, just focus on like your spinners, your spoons, your soft plastics, just anything like to like jig also like frogs for bass, and even like pike depending on how big of a frog you have. Sometimes pike will just eat at anything. Walleye definitely probably.
Yeah, like what helps the most is just really knowing how the fish behave in the lake you're fishing for sure. Because if you know that, you know what they're feeding on, and then you know what to use, it makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. All right, well, thank you, Brady. Appreciate it.
Um,
Shake my hand.